The idea of having a good work ethic out in the world, but also we should have a not my phone, so. Good job. Good job, Trish. Okay, we're done. But as I see the world, and I know there was people when I was younger that didn't want to work either, but the idea is we have to work for God just as much as we work for a living. We have to try to do the things that we need to do for God also. We need to put more into it. Always be considerate of others, and one thing that we really need to do is, no matter what we're doing, we have to realize that God is the real boss. He's the real boss. Here's a story about an 18-year-old Freddie. He was friendly and eager to do things right. Unfortunately, he wasn't especially bright. He had just started his first job as a delivery boy and general warehouse employee at a furniture warehouse. His first task was to go get coffee for the men. He walked into a nearby coffee shop carrying a large thermos. When the clerk finally noticed him, he held up the thermos. He said, "Is this big enough to hold 6 cups of coffee?" He said, the clerk said, he looked at the thermos and hesitated for a few seconds, then finally said, "Yeah, it looks like it'll hold about 6. Good. Freddie said, "Give me 2 regular, 2 decaf, and 2 extra." Now, all I can say is at least he was trying to do what was right. And that could be half the battle for us as far as living correctly and doing what we're supposed to do. I started my work career when I was 13, working for a farmer. And this guy used to just work the devil out of us. I mean, he just would, he was 60 years old, and he could work rings around to 3 guys he had working for him, all 3 of us. It just was amazing. He'd pick us up at 5:30 in the morning and drop us off at home at 9 o'clock. And then his wife said he would go home and work on the equipment until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to get it ready for the next day, sometimes. So, and we baled hay, we cut weeds under the fence, under electric fences, we cleaned manure out of the stalls. And sometimes we even blew grain into a big room that he had there. And if I knew now what I needed to know then what I know now about grain exploding, okay, because we wore respirators, but we were in a big, it was just, when we were blowing it in there, it was going everywhere, and I didn't know that stuff could explode. I mean, we were actually in harm's way with the equipment that we were using and everything like that, but luckily it just never did that. But and some of the things we did was pretty hard. I mean, when you're baling hay, now it's easy. They just make it in big rolls, they put it in big garbage bags, put it in the field. Not easy, but I mean, it's easier than it was then. Because you had to have a guy running the tractor, you had to have a guy taking the bales up and putting them on the wagon. The guy had to stack them, and then you had to take them into the barn. And that was the most fun about it, was in the barn, because it was about 189,000 degrees up in that loft, and he just kept the conveyor going until the trailer was empty. You know what I mean? So there was no breaks, and it was pretty hot. But I learned a lot about doing, having a boss and doing what the boss told you. Even though you may have thought it was wrong, but you still did what you were supposed to do, And I learned at an early age that when you have a job, you're supposed to be there. You're supposed to be there on time. You're supposed to leave in enough time to make it, and things like that. And I've heard all kinds of excuses, And then when I got my license, my driver's license, I actually got I guess you might call a real job at a gas station, pumping gas. And for you older folks in here, you probably remember one time when you pulled into a service station, it was actually a service station. You went there and you got your gas pumped for you, you got your windshield washed, maybe even got the air checked in your tires. and even had your oil checked. You know what I mean? That was the way it was. And I worked for an Esso station when I first started, and then they went to Exxon, and I think Exxon went out of business. I think Mobil bought them. But that was the time that I learned what serving people was. Now, did I like all the people that came in? No, some of them I didn't really care for because they acted just like, for lack of better words, like an idiot. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I knew that I was at their beck and call, but sometimes it just, sometimes people just push you a little bit too far. But we pumped gas, and back then it was, when I started driving, it was, 39 cents a gallon. You could put $2 or $3 worth of gas in your car and ride around all night. Now it's, almost $3 now. But, you learn as you go along with your jobs. And I worked at Summit Racing for 4.5 years, and I worked afternoon shift for 4.5 years. And my family can attest to this, I was probably the most miserable person in the world. You couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't do anything. All you did was eat, sleep, and work. That's all you did. You know what I mean? You never had time to do anything else. If everything happens in the evening, you couldn't go. So when I got to the hospital, finally, when I got a job at the hospital, I worked steady day term. All my Sundays off, and every other weekend off. And I got a new perspective on life as far as the job was concerned. I was happier with that job than I ever was any job that I've ever had in my whole life. I was happier with that job, except for when I was in business for myself, because I was my own boss, and it does have its perks. But the idea is, when you get a job, you agree to certain things. You do what the boss tells you to do. When the garbage guy was off, I gathered the garbage. When the linen guy was off, I put the linens on the shelves. When the floor guy was off, I did the floors. And then when they were all three there and I was there, then I had special projects. I'd take all the furniture out of the room, out of a room if it was empty, and scrub the floor. Not polish it, but scrub it. They weren't made to polish. They were just made to be scrubbed. So I'd scrub them. And I don't know whether it's because I was in such a nasty situation before or what, but I loved that job until my back went out, and I had to give it up, and I hated to give it up. I just hated to give it up. I tried to even, the one day I went back and I told Roger Farmer from Columbiana, is the one that got me the job, and I went in the one day, and it was just a normal day. I went back and started doing my job, and then all of a sudden I just couldn't even hardly walk. And I went in and told Roger, I said, I'm going to have to go home. And then the next morning I went in and I said, I'm going to give it a try. I lasted 45 minutes. I couldn't even do anything. It was just horrible. Those things happen to you. But, and Roger didn't look at me like I was crazy when I said I had to go home, because he knew me. And he knew what kind of a worker I was. So he knew that I wasn't, trying to pull something, So, and that's what we have to realize. We have to realize that what we put into stuff, we get out of it, and the people there, all they did was complain. All they did was complain. We went to a meeting one day, we got a 35-cent an hour raise. A 35-cent an hour raise. I was tickled pink, because I was going to get 35 cents more an hour. You know what I mean? It's more money in my pocket. Got in the elevator with two cleaning ladies. Well, they're doing, they're complaining. Oh, we only got 35 cents. So I looked at him and I said, when you got the job here, did they tell you what you were going to be paid? Yeah. I said, well, now they're paying you 35 cents more. I says, if you're not satisfied with it, why don't you go somewhere else and work? It's as simple as that, and that's what work ethics are all about, is getting along with your workers and getting along with your boss. And I've had bosses that I literally just felt like just choking. There's just no doubt about it. I had bosses like that. But the idea is you still have to do what you're told and do what you're supposed to do. And if God's our boss, we have to do what we're supposed to do. In John 5:17, Jesus answered them, my Father has been working until now, and I have been working also. We have to put more into it, and I have to put more into my spiritual life. I just sit here and admit I have to put more into my spiritual life. And I hope that after this you'll think about the same thing. I found this story about a man who had been on time for 30 years, never missed a day's work. My stepdad worked for the state highway, and he got a gold watch when he retired for 30 years. He never missed a day. That's why they gave him that gold watch. Never missed a day. He was a raging alcoholic. His life consisted of, with his eggs and bacon and my mother cooked for him for breakfast, he'd have a shot in the beer. He'd go to work. He wouldn't drink on the job. Them other guys, the guys with shovels and stuff like that, they'd go into a bar, they'd have a sandwich, and they'd drink on the job. But he would never drink as long as he was driving that truck. And a shot in the beer to him was like me or you having, you know, if I sniffed the cap of a whiskey bottle, I'd probably get drunk. You know what I mean? I mean, that's just basically the way he was. He'd go home and eat and then drink himself into a drunken stupor until my mother had to help him into bed. And that was that's what his life consisted of. You know, but his work ethics, I learned from his work ethics. He was always up. He was up early enough to get to work, and he went and he did what he had to do. And he was sober on the job. You know, so, but the thing is, we have to realize that the people that we look at are also going to be the examples. The younger people that are in here. I always pick on Josh and Trish because they're the only youngest, or Lindsay too. They're the youngest people here. That's the ones we have. But they learn their work ethics from their parents to begin with. And then they learn their work ethics from the job that they're doing now or going to college, whatever. You still have to have work ethics when you're studying. You still have to have those ethics. In 2 Thessalonians 3, 6 through 10, it reads, "But we command you, brethren, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you withdraw from every brother who walks disorderly and not according to the traditions which he received from us. For you yourself know how you ought to follow us. For we were not disorderly among you, nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we might not be burdened to any of you. Not because we do not have authority, but to make ourselves an example of how you should follow us. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone will not work, he shall not eat, neither shall he eat." If we hang around with lazy people, we're probably going to be lazy. Maybe not. I mean, maybe you have a work ethic. Maybe that goes along. It doesn't matter who you're with, but we need to put more into it, whether it's our spiritual life or our worldly life. So what's the message in that verse? Don't be idle, don't be lazy. Stay away from those who live that way. Why? Because people affect people. Just like our example affects everyone else. That's one thing I can say about my kids. They do have a good work ethic. They always have had a good work ethic. They've always gone to work when they were supposed to and things like that. And it's because me and Mary set that same example, you know. And that's what we have to do. We have to set that example. If you hang around or run with the bad dogs, guess what you're going to turn into? You're going to turn into a bad dog. Or if you hang around with lazy people, you're going to end up being a lazy dog too. In 1 Corinthians 15 through 33, it reads, "Evil company corrupts good habits." That verse that we just read was written, not the one we just read, but the one above that one, was written by Paul. And at the end, in verse 8, he says, "Nor did we eat anyone's bread free of charge, but worked with labor and toil night and day, that we may not be a burden to any of you." They worked night and day. I don't know of many men that work night and day. I did it when I was younger, but you know the old saying says, men work from sun to sun, but woman's work is never done. And it's never done. If a woman has a full-time job, or even if she's just a homemaker, it's always something that needs to be done. I think that the key to hard work is the realization that you're serving your fellow man in some form or another. regardless of what you do for a living, please think of giving the best service possible. You're serving your fellow humans. Give them good service and give them your best, whatever you do. And we also need to be considerate of other people. When I had my own business, I had people working under me, and that's something that I always try to do, is treat people with respect and try to treat people the way I would want to be treated, you know. And my kids will probably tell you I was pretty hard on them, but, you know, I always tried to make sure that they were where they were supposed to be and doing what they were supposed to do, you know. And if they weren't, then they got it. A store manager overheard a clerk saying to a customer, "No, ma'am, we haven't had any for some weeks now, and it doesn't look like as if we're going to get any soon." Alarmed by what was being said, the manager rushed over to the customer who was walking out the door and said, "That isn't true, ma'am. Of course we'll have some soon. In fact, we placed an order for it a couple weeks ago." Then the manager drew the clerk aside and growled at him, "Never, never, never say we don't have anything. If we don't have it, say we ordered it and it will be in." Now, what was she wanting? And the clerk smiled and said, "Rain." We need to always be considerate of everybody. Answer their questions the best you can. Be polite and courteous. And this holds true for people that are in the people business, people that are dealing with people all the time. My son Chris, that comes here occasionally, he could sell ice cubes to an Eskimo. He just got that gift of being able to sell. He's not afraid to talk to anybody. In high school, he got a job with Gutter King in Youngstown. And he was a salesman. And he'd be driving down the street, and he'd see a guy cutting grass, and his gutter was hanging loose from his house. And he'd stop in. He'd say, "Hey, we can fix that for you." So the guy told him one time, he was doing so well, he said, "I'll give you 10% of what you sell." So he calls me up one day and he says, "I'm standing in the office with my boss. I sold $30,000 in 6 weeks and he won't give me my 10%. And I said, well, Chris, did you sign any papers with him on this agreement?" And he said, "No, Dad, I didn't." And I said, "Well, you got two choices. Either keep working for the guy or just tell him adios and be on your way. Go work for somebody else that will give you your commission." And then the last thing I said to him, "Did you learn anything?" "Yeah, Dad. Get everything in writing." See, those are the kind of things that happen to you, especially when you're trying to do what's right. You know what I mean? And I mean, he, you know, selling that kind of jobs in that kind of time, you know what I mean? He was well worth the money, you know. In 1 Peter, it tells us, "Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tenderhearted, be courteous, not returning evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessings, knowing that you were called to this, that you might inherit a blessing." And the point Peter is trying to make there is that people should work with people, not against people. And especially in our religion. We have the usual crowd here today. And I want you to stop and think for a minute. Do you agree with everybody in this room on every subject? And guess what? I'm going to give you a revelation. It's never going to happen. Never. It's never going to happen. Very rarely is it you're going to have this many people together and make a decision and everybody's going to go along with it. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I guess I shouldn't have said never. Because an older lady that me and Bill Covian used to go visit, Bill would use the word never, and she used to look at him and say, "Bill, you're going to run out of those." So, well, one of the work ethics that's shown in the Bible is in Luke 10:25 through 37. And I'm going to paraphrase it. It'll be up on the thing there, but I'm going to paraphrase it. And we all know the story. It's a guy comes to Jesus and he's asking him questions, and he wants to know, if what he has to do to be saved, what he has to do to inherit eternal life. And it ends up that, he's got money and he's, got to have an answer. So, and he asked Jesus the question of what he has to do, and Jesus lets him know, or he lets Jesus know, and Jesus agrees. And then he makes the statement, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, do you know who your neighbor is? I mean, you may not know him personally, but you know who your neighbor is, right? You know they live right beside you. That's basically what they're talking about here. But he's not only talking about that, he's talking about anybody you come in contact with, is what he's talking about. So Jesus is probably saying to himself, what's wrong with this guy? He don't even know who his neighbor is. But it was kind of a trick question. It would be something a reporter would ask you if he was trying to trap you. You know what I'm saying? And Jesus goes on to tell him this story of the Good Samaritan. Man gets beat up. He's along the road. I mean, I've asked myself this question lots of times. If I seen someone beat up along the road, would I actually stop or would I just call the police? I guess that would have to be something that I would have to think about at the time that it happens. But this man, he doesn't even give us any indication he thought about it at all. He went right into it, put the guy up, took care of him, did his wounds. And then Jesus tells this man that he's talking to, you go and do likewise. In other words, you go and don't make everything that you make and everything that you own the most important thing in your life. In fact, get rid of all that stuff. And I know I'm blending a couple stories here, but you catch the drift. He's telling them, go and do likewise. Put more into work than you get out of it. Always be considerate of others. There's two points we went over. A young engineer was leaving the office for the day when he found the acting CEO standing in front of the shredder with a piece of paper in his hand. Listen, said the acting CEO, this is a very sensitive and important document, and my secretary is not here. Can you make this thing work for me? Certainly, said the young engineer. He turned the machine on, inserted the paper, and pressed the start button. Excellent, excellent, said the acting CEO as his paper disappeared inside the machine. I just need one copy. Never ever assume that the boss knows what he's talking about unless it's God. When God tells us something in His Word, He knows what He's talking about. And I've had bosses that thought they knew everything. So Paul said that we're to obey our earthly masters. That's found in Colossians 3:22 through 25. And that would be our bosses or our managers. Or men, your wives. Or women, your husbands. Now we have to ask ourselves this question this morning. Who is in control of our life? Who's controlling it? Carrie Underwood wrote a song. I don't know whether she wrote it or not, but she got popular from being on American Idol. And the song that she wrote was, or like I said, she sang it. Jesus, take the wheel. Take it from my hands, because I can't do this on my own. I'm letting go, so give me one more chance to save me from this road I'm on. Jesus, take the wheel. Well, we know that she was getting out of control on ice, is what she was saying there, but that goes into our life also. A farmer once said, the hardest thing about milking cows is that they never stay milked. I worked on a gentleman's vehicles that was a dairy farmer, and he was tied to the land. There's no doubt about it. 2 times a day, he was tied to the land. And it's true for many jobs. We're tied to it. God meant for us to work. We were designed to work. That's why he put that verse in there. If you don't work, you shouldn't eat. I mean, there are situations where people can't work. There's no doubt. But God meant for us to work. And to do a good job in life, we must give it our best. We must try to be the best Christians we can be. We will never go wrong as long as we seek the Lord first. Work or otherwise. The last slide I had up here is the God's plan of salvation. And if you read down through that and do those steps, you can become a Christian. And the most important one, not only just baptism, but go on to live a faithful life. God expects that of us. He expects us to live that way. If you have a need this morning to come, to rededicate, or to be baptized, we can gladly do that for you. Please come as we stand and sing.